Support for the Brewlosophy podcast comes from the following. Love to Brew is a national leader in homebrewing supplies, offering exclusive products such as East Coast yeast, TV taps, and Brewlosophy recipe kits, all with free shipping on orders over $75. When you need brewing ingredients or equipment, check out Love to Brew at love2brew.com. The best beer requires the best hops, which Yakima Valley Hops provides fresh from the source to brewers around the world. Find everything from classics to modern favorites, as well as cool experimental varieties and a vast array of ingredients and gear at yakimavalleyhops.com. Hey, I'm Marshall Schott.
I'm Malcolm Fraser.
And this is the Brewlosophy Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about water chemistry, and in particular, mash pH. Now, this is one of those variables that, at least for me, I used to kind of view as being of minor importance, something I don't really have to focus on. And then I started doing some experimentation, and it's something I do focus on now. To the point I check my mash pH every batch, and we've done some experiments to kind of parse out the impact that pH has. And so for this episode, we're going to chat about the purported benefits, the purported downsides of a mash pH being outside of the proper range. We're going to talk about our opinions and whatnot. It should be really interesting.
Would you say that previously you were a chemistry denier?
I was not a denier of chemistry. I was a ignorer of the impact that water chemistry might have had.
Right on.
All right. Before that, we've got some feedback and announcements to make, as always. First off, people have been asking a lot lately about where they can get our merch. We opened up this store. We had some glasses. We had stickers. We had hats. We had Brutility belts. All of that stuff sold really well and way faster than I expected. As I was getting ready to order more stuff, I started talking with some people about potentially setting up some sort of a deal where our merchandise is sold by them. That sounds really weird, I know, and I don't want to get into too many details, but we are working that out right now. It's going to make getting our stuff a lot easier for you guys, and also means that I don't have to turn my garage into a warehouse. So it's coming. Hold your horses. I really do appreciate that you guys want to sport our weird stuff. That's really rad. But it's just taking more time than I expected. I hope to have it figured out by the end of the year, which, hopefully, it'd be great if we had it before then, but who knows? I give myself some padding. That's really all I got to say about the store. If you want a hat, we've got some in there, brewlosophy.com/store. You can pick up a hat. You can grab some stickers. If you don't pay the shipping for one sticker, if you buy one sticker, I'm going to throw like 4 or 5 in an envelope for you. So the setting up, this is what the stuff I don't want to have to deal with anymore. Setting up shipping on something small like stickers, it makes it exorbitant just to order one sticker. So anyways, that's the kind of stuff we're dealing with there. The store, I'm not sure how long it's going to last on the brewlosophy.com website, but we will have merchandise at some point, and we're going to make it really, really neat.
I like seeing people out and about with you see a random shirt spotting, and occasionally some people in the group, some of the other contributors, I'll take a picture. And I met some guy at a museum. Oh, look at this, Brewlosophy shirt spotted in the wild.
It's so weird. Yeah. I actually just this morning got an email from a guy named Jonas over in Sweden who sent me a couple of photos of him sporting our shirts out in Sweden, out in a grain field with his kid, and just supporting the cause. And it's crazy to see people around the world wearing these t-shirts of ours, but it's also really cool and humbling. So anyways, those will be back. The shirts are still available over on Amazon.com. Just make sure if you go over there to search for Brewlosophy and only purchase from Brewlosophy. There are people who have stolen our designs and they're trying to make a buck off of it, and they might sell them for cheaper, but you're not helping us out if you buy those. So, all right, a couple of announcements. We've got quite a few cool events coming up. First off, this one's local. I live in a small town, Fresno, well, relatively small town. It's the 5th largest city in the state of California, but Fresno is kind of known for its agriculture and kind of farming community and whatnot. Well, our neighbor city, which is even smaller, is called Clovis, and they've started this neat thing that they do. I think they do it twice a year now. It's called the Old Town Clovis Craft Beer Crawl. It'll be happening August 27th, so just a couple weeks from now. And basically what they do is they have all of the local breweries who want to participate, which I believe this year is all of them. That's, Full Circle, Tioga Sequoia, hopefully House of Pendragon Brewing Company. All of these professional breweries come and they set up shop inside the stores that line this really cute downtown area called Old Town Clovis. Besides the professional breweries, though, they have homebrewers come out and serve their beer in the same way. And so you get to try all of these really fun, unique beers and bounce around from shop to shop and see all the cool stuff there is to see down there. So I'll be there this year, August 27th, doing an Instagram takeover with the city of Clovis, which I've never done. It sounds like a lot of fun. But if you're around, if you're looking for something to do that weekend, again, it's August 27th. I'd love it if you came out. If you live in the area, or if you live just a couple hours away and you're looking for a beer thing to do on August 27th, come over and let me know. We'll be sure to hang out and have a beer together. So that's the Old Town Clovis Craft Beer Crawl. Okay, so next month in September, I'm going to be heading up to Yakima, Washington. Hop Harvest is the place to be in the month of September. I was lucky enough last year to be invited up by Hopsteiner and was able to view their entire, their processing facilities and I got to see how they pelletize hops and just an absolute eye-opening, mind-blowing experience to see everything that goes into getting a hop from a seed into a delicious beer. And I'm really excited. I'm actually doing an interview with Doug Wilson from Hopsteiner here very soon, and we'll be putting out an episode just purely focusing on what it takes to get hops from seed to glass. So, but I'll be up there September 22nd through 25th, hanging out with the dudes from Yakima Valley Hops. They're real good friends of ours here at Brewlosophy, and we've got some cool ideas we've been tossing around to kind of contribute to the party-like atmosphere. Nothing set in stone yet, but if you are in the area and you want to hang out, please let me know. September 22nd through 25th, Brian Hall, the newest contributor to Brewlosophy, just bought his plane tickets as well. So he'll be joining me. We're going to be having a blast. Come over. A wild time. That'd be a lot of fun. The Great American Beer Fest is coming up, and Jake Houlihan will be going again. This will be his second year going, representing Brewlosophy. And Malcolm, you're heading out there too.
That's right. I'm going to be doing some different events, and I'll be hanging with some of the Helicon guys. It's a small local brewery here in Western PA that my friend Chris Brunetti started at, and a good friend Andy Weigel's brewing for. So I'm going to be there rooting them on for sure.
That's awesome. And I know that you and Jake are going to be going around and trying out a whole bunch of new beers that you haven't had. And we'll be penning an article about those beers, maybe try to get some information so that people can try to replicate some of the best beers that you guys try while you're out there. Speaking of Helicon, this is completely off topic, but I had one of those very weird moments a couple months ago when I was over at my aunt's house here in Fresno, California. We're out swimming and she invites a neighbor over, and we start talking about beer stuff, and he's a big craft beer fan. And he mentions to me that he's got this cousin who lives in Pittsburgh who just happened to start a brewery called Helicon. And I said, wait a minute, I swear I've heard that brewery name before from Malcolm. And sure enough, his cousin is Chris, right?
Yeah, Chris Brunetti. Yeah.
What are the odds? I mean, that just seems so. I mean, to me, it's a reminder that as big as this world is, when you've got something that people share a passion about, it really does kind of bring things together and really shows you just how small the world can be.
Want to hear another kind of small world brewing thing? So the guy who won Home Brewer of the Year, I might mispronounce his last name, so sorry, Zach Kozlow. So the Home Brewer of the Year this year at NHC, he moved back to Pittsburgh, where he's from. He showed up yesterday at our trash picnic, with a Brewlosophy shirt on.
Well, one of the many reasons I love brewing and craft beer is just how rad the community is, and these little experiences certainly do validate that. Okay, finally, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to make it to this event, but I want to mention it because Brew Your Own magazine has been a huge supporter of Brewlosophy since the beginning. They've published articles of ours in their magazines and whatnot, and I just really, if you don't have a Brew Your Own magazine subscription yet, go get it. It's one of the best resources for homebrewers. They are doing their boot camp series, and they're going to be hosting it in Indianapolis, Indiana on November 3rd and 4th. Learn hands-on from brewing experts including John Palmer, Gordon Strong, Dr. Chris White from White Labs, Brad Smith, Michael Tonsmeyer, Ashton Lewis, John Blickman, and so many more. These full-day workshops are limited to just 35 people, and when you register by September 15th, you'll save $125. Plus, portion of your registration will come to Brewlosophy to support what we're doing. All you have to do is write Brewlosophy in the notes section of the bootcamp registration shopping cart when checking out. BYO, again, has just been a huge supporter of what we're doing, so we really appreciate them setting this up. If you're in the Indianapolis area and you plan to go to this thing, just make sure when you register to write Brewlosophy in the notes. You can learn more about the bootcamp series at byo.com/boot-camp-overview, or just Google BYO Bootcamp and you'll get there. All right, if you'd like to throw some support our way, head over to brewlosophy.com/support, where you'll find a list of links to use whenever you shop at places like Amazon, More Beer, Adventures in Homebrewing, Love to Brew, and pretty much every other online homebrew shop. You won't feel a thing. We get a small kickback that helps us to keep bringing you these shows. If you want a little something in return for your support, check out our Patreon, where for as little as $1 a month, you'll be granted access to never before published Brewlosophy recipes. You'll receive invites to monthly video chats, and you can even work with us to design your very own experiment. That's patreon.com/Brewlosophy. Also, we'd like to ask you all to do us a huge favor by subscribing to the Brewlosophy podcast and then leaving us a review wherever it is you listen to your podcast. Something this simple really does help us out a ton. Thanks to everyone who's been doing this stuff already. We really do appreciate it. Okay, if you have any questions for our Brew and A episodes, please email them to me, Marshall@brewlosophy.com, or you can drop them on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Reddit, or wherever else we hang out online. We are compiling those questions on a list and do plan to record our second Brew and A episode here shortly. All right. You know what time it is, Malcolm?
What time is it?
It's time for everybody's favorite beer review. For this one, I served my friends Jersey and Tim a 2017 Sierra Nevada Bigfoot barley wine. Now, this is one of those beers that my local friends at least, and I live relatively close to Chico. This is one of those beers that people like to take and store, and then they'll do their verticals and drink them. They like to age them for a little while. But I thought, I had a buddy who brought over a bottle for me from this year's Bigfoot barley wine, and I thought, let me see what these dudes think about a barley wine, which is a style that I don't think either of them has ever tried. That's relatively fresh.
1 minute beer review with Jersey and Tim.
This is dark.
This is like your soul. It's dark like your soul. You bottled it up. It's got a good nose feel.
It smells like my soul.
It's got a good nose feel. Yeah. I don't think it smells like anything. None of them smell like anything.
Ooh, not so good.
Yeah, that's terrible.
That's rough. Soap.
I'm getting soap too. I actually get it. I'm just agreeing with you. I know that you always get soap. It tastes very soapy.
It's not a good drinking beer.
I think this would be a great beer to serve to people to impress your friends, and then they don't understand it, and you hold that against them.
It smells good, but it's not good.
Like you say things like, I get pine and some citrus, and they're like, me too. And then you're like, no, I don't get that. Like, this is a good beer for that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's hard to drink.
It's awful. I'm just going to say, it's not good. I don't even know what it is, but it's not good.
Oh. It tastes like tire. I get a little bit of tire.
The last tire I had, it does taste like tire. I'm going to have to say.
We're done.
All right, when we come back from this short break, we are going to get into the topic of this show, which is MASH pH. Stay tuned. After a long brew day, the last thing I want to do is waste time chilling work, which is why I use cleverly designed immersion chillers from Jaded Brewing. After some bad experiences with counterflow and plate chillers, I began the search for a more efficient chilling solution and discovered Jaded. That was nearly 4 years ago, and to this day, I continue to rely on the King Cobra and the Hydra to chill my wort in record time without the setup or cleaning hassle of other chillers. If you're looking for a way to optimize your brew day, I can't recommend Jaded chillers enough. Go see what they have to offer at jadedbrewing.com and let them know Brewlosophy sent you. So, Malcolm, tell us a little bit about MASH pH, why it's important, what people can do to adjust for it.
Right on. So I'll start with the basic definition of pH itself. So pH in an aqueous solution is usually expressed as the negative logarithm of the concentration of hydrogen ions in that solution. So more or less, what it is the concentration in moles per liter of hydrogen ions. But some people will say that pH is also an expression of the activity of hydronium, H3O. And basically, it's the ratio or the relative activity of hydrogen in solution, which is what we call acidity, because pH is most commonly set as a scale of 0 to 14. You can go above and below those numbers, actually, but that's beyond the scope. So it's essentially, 0 to 14 is where most things range at. And it's a negative logarithm because as the hydrogen concentration goes up, the hydrogen ion concentration goes up, the pH actually goes down.
Right.
So more hydrogen, lower pH, and then pH, less than 7 can be determined as acidic, and higher than 7 we term it as basic. And
Right.
That's a generality, but that's usually true.
Now, just to put this into kind of practical terms, so, a pH, typically tap water is in the pH range of like 7.5 to 9.
Yeah, I would say that's even more simply 8. More or less.
And then stuff that might be stuff that is acidic would be something like, I think on the very acidic end, you have things like vinegar and lemon juice, and of course
Right.
the acids that we use to adjust in our mashes and brewing. And then on the basic end, you've got things like bleach and sodium hydroxide.
Right, absolutely. Those are the two extremes that we run into on a daily basis. And beer is usually what? So beer finished product is usually around, you'll hear anything from 3.8 to 4.3, or you'll hear 4, a pH up to like 4.5, 4.6.
So finished beer in general is an acidic solution.
Yes, it's in the 4s, in the mid to low 4s for sure, and except for sour beers, which can be in the high 2s to low 3s for sure.
Right. So when it comes to pH and brewing, I think the place where most people tend to focus on it is outside of sour beer brewing, of course, is the pH of the mash. So
Yeah.
the combination of the milled grain, the grist, and water. And tell us a little bit about what's important about mash pH.
Well, I'll tell you what. As you said, most people worry about it there, and there's a good reason. One of it is practicality, because if you set your pH in your mash, it will more or less carry through, right? So you can do most of your adjustments at the mash level, and then provided you don't do anything wild, later mineral additions or later acid additions, it's going to kind of follow through at a predictable progression. You'll have a drop during the mash, you'll have a drop during the boil, you'll have a drop during fermentation, etc.
Right.
So what you can do is set up your mash pH and then make that your practice. If you don't like the way the beer results, then next time you can make your adjustment in the mash again. People usually state somewhere around a target of like, let's say 5.2 to 5.6 or 5.7.
Right.
And as long as you're in there, more or less the beer is going to be fine. And that's one of the most important things about mash pH is it's not really a problem unless there's a problem.
Before we get into the different ways that mash pH can be adjusted for and monitored and whatnot, let's talk a little bit about what I guess what we can kind of expect from different pHs that stay within that normal range as well as that kind of fall outside of it. I know that, my perspective has been that a lower mash pH, perhaps just because I know that means it's more acidic, is going to produce a beer that maybe is crisper in character, maybe a little bit lighter on the palate, and has, kind of when I think of low mash pH, I think of things like Pilsner and Helles and even like IPA. Whereas a mash pH upwards of 5.5, 5.6, I'm thinking of kind of a rounder beer with maybe more malt character that doesn't have that crispness. Maybe the flavor lingers a little bit longer. And I would do, in the day at least, I would aim for porter and stout to be kind of in the 5.4 to 5.6 range as opposed to that 5.2.
Some people will say, and it seems to be true, is that perhaps Czech brewers will mash low, right? And then that helps them not get a lot of color development because the higher pH will give you more color development in the boil.
Right.
And if you think of it in a rudimentary sense, you talk about the dark grains, mashing with dark grains. Well, for most people with moderate alkalinity and lower residual alkalinity, and that's a subject we don't want to get into too much here, but essentially, if you have a normal water, of average alkalinity and a darker grist, it's going to lower the pH. So you'll actually end up with a lower pH because of the organic acids and and darker kilned.
Right. There's a relationship between the roast of a grain and its pH, right? And so in essence, again, practically speaking, if you put a bunch of roasted malt, 500 Levabon, British roasted malt or roasted barley into your mash, you are going to drop that pH, and it works in that way. It can drop it below. I've seen it drop below 5 pH at times. Same way if you're brewing a beer that's just 100% Pilsner malt, you want that pH to be within the recommended range, you're going to have to use something to acidify that mash. And what are ways brewers can acidify their mash?
So there's two different ways, and I'll just go through my method basically. So I use brewing water. So what I'll do is I'll take my water, and it's always nice to know where you're starting, right? Because otherwise you're like giving someone directions to a place and they don't know where they're at, So you have to sit there and say, what is your water? So you find out what your water is.
Yeah. You can send your water into a place like Ward Labs and have it tested. Yeah. It's really cheap, and it's
$27. Yeah, it's like $27, and people act like it's $1 million. And I'm just like, that's about a batch.
Yeah.
Now all your subsequent batches have the potential to be better. Or find a friend who has a brew lab, a water sampling kit, or buy one. A homebrew club can get together and buy one.
Or, I mean, honestly, I think the easiest thing that I've done, I have had my water tested, but at the same time, once I got my results back from Ward Labs, this was, 2012, so over 5 years ago, I ended up calling up the dude at my local water district and asking him, and he loved it. I mean, I don't think these guys, get a lot of brewers calling them and expressing interest in what it is they do. And so I called him up, and he shared with me the latest testing results from all the different wells that I pull from. And I'm actually lucky enough to, 80% of the year I pull from a single source. And so it's very consistent water. Anyways, you in order to make proper adjustments, you have to know your starting water.
You're giving someone directions. You need to know where they're at. So anyways, you have your water, you enter that in your calculator, and then you add your grist. So that's the grains you're going to add, right? And the water is going to interact with the grist, and you're going to settle on a pH. And let's just say you did almost an 100% pale ale malt beer. In most water across the U.S., you'll probably end up around 5.7, a pH of 5.7 to 5.8. That's just the way it works. Most water of average alkalinity, average hardness, in a moderately kilned pale ale malt, you'll end up around there. Now, let's just say you are using really, really light malt, like a Pilsner malt, 1.8 Levabon, and you have slightly harder water than typical with a moderate hardness with a high alkalinity. So they counteract each other. And then you notice in your worksheet that, oh my God, my pH is going to be like 5.9 to like 6.1 or whatever, something. You're like, oh, I want to counteract that. So then you say, what kind of beer am I going to make? And then you adjust your minerals, your salts, to get the flavor profile you desire. So if you're leaning malty, you tend to go a little higher chloride. If you're leaning a snappy, crisp hop character, you might, these are generalities, but you might lean a little more towards sulfate. So you add some more calcium sulfate. After you add those salts, it's going to alter the pH of the mash. And that's because the calcium interacts with the phosphates, and there's a phytic acid reaction, which lowers the pH as well. So then you say, okay, now my pH is actually going to be around 5.7. Then you can add acids or an acid source. It can either be a mineral acid like hydrochloric, something hydrosulfuric if you want to go that route, or you can add a organic acid like lactic acid. And that's what a lot of people do. And a lot of Germans use either Sauergut or what's the other? Acid malt, right? So acid malt has lactic ions on it, and those lower the pH even further. You can adjust your mash pH after your minerals to hit your desired target. So you say I want to hit 5.3 or 5.4. You add a couple mLs of acid. You input your strength of the acid, and it will tell you your new pH. So and they're pretty accurate. And I've heard some people say one's more accurate than the other, and it all comes down to use one, try it. Take a measurement, or if you don't have a pH meter, then just taste it, and then you adjust from there. In the end, what matters is that you adjust after you do it. Just about everything with brewing is get the finished product, taste, share, take notes, and adjust. So pH is this magic number. It doesn't matter if it's 5.5 or 5.2. Do you like it? change it.
So when it comes to accuracy, I've found using Bruin water, kind of combined with Beersmith. I have a weird way of doing it, but it is incredibly accurate, and that's hugely a function of knowing my starting water what my water looks like, and then trusting Bruin water to calculate everything and plugging everything in properly and whatnot. So there, you mentioned there are multiple ways of adjusting the pH of the mash as it's going. And, you said acidulated malt, that's a common way. Now there's some argument that if your mash pH is really high, you're going to have to use enough acidulated malt that it could, eventually impact the flavor of your beer. And so a lot of people end up moving to a liquid form of acid, whether that's phosphoric acid, which usually comes in a 10% solution. If you're lucky, you can find it higher, or 88% lactic acid, which is what I've settled on using. I think,
right.
In most, even in my palest beers, I end up using no more for like a 10-gallon batch, no more than maybe 7 milliliters of lactic acid, 88% lactic acid to adjust my pH down to where I need it. And then you mentioned Sauergut. Can you spend a second talking a little bit about what that is?
So Sauergut, which I'll go over in a second, lactic acid, meaning the liquid form, or acidulated malt, they're all putting lactate ions into your beer.
Exactly.
And that's what's lowering the pH, right? It's just different methods of doing it.
Yeah.
Do those methods result in a flavor impact? Perhaps, because the production of the lactic acid could have carriers.
Right.
If a factory is making lactic acid, and sometimes they do it via a method that also produces other chemical riders, other molecules, that has the potential beyond what the lactate ions have. So you can kind of look up at what point does lactate ions have a flavor impact. And some people, Martin Brungard in particular, will say that is part of the character of German beers.
Ah,
right?
That's interesting.
Some people
yeah.
swear by it. Yes, they swear by it. When it's missing, the beer is different, and that is up to each person's perception to agree or disagree on. But I think there's something to it personally.
Yeah.
Now, Sauergut is they literally just have like a bioreactor, in some forms of making Sauergut. They have a bioreactor in which they are growing lactic acid via bacteria, lactic acid producing bacteria, usually lactobacillus, and they feed it wort, and the bacteria eat the sugar and produce lactate ions. It's a byproduct of their, if you want to call it fermentation, or their synthesis.
And then that gets added back to the mash to reduce the pH.
Yeah.
Is that how that works? Okay, cool. Yeah, I've never used or made Sauergut.
Yeah, it's considered, a more graceful, method of doing it to some people's predilections. They kind of like that more. They see it more organic and more natural, and that's for each brewer to decide for himself, I guess.
It's certainly more romantic. I mean, that kind of has that traditional, feel, and I like it. I mean, I doubt I'll ever do it, but it's interesting. So speaking of what have you settled on? What do you use at least most often? Before we get into talking about the experiments that we've done on mash pH, what do you do to adjust your pH?
So depending on where my water is at, because I test my water, I don't say all the time, but fairly regularly. So if my alkalinity creeps up a bit, I'll end up trying to stay below like 1.5 milliliters per gallon of liquor, of brewing liquor. And that just seems to work for me for keeping, I don't want to get into that buttery realm of some of the lactic acid, in my opinion and experience, has some almost a diacetyl-like smell to it.
Mm-hmm.
So I stay about 1.5 milliliters per gallon. And if I have to go above that, when my alkalinity creeps up, I'll counter it with some phosphoric acid.
Huh.
So I adjust my ratio. So if I'm doing like a West Coast IPA, I'm like a 2-to-1 ratio of sulfate to chloride, right? And I adjust that with either gypsum or calcium sulfate or calcium chloride. I see where my pH is going to be. I add my liquid lactic acid, but I actually use acid malt a lot because I just usually have it on hand. So I'll add some acid malt, maybe some liquid lactic acid, and I see where my pH is. And if I want to keep it, I like to be around 5.3, 5.35. If I'm there, great. If not, if my level of lactate ions, because the new Bruin water will show you the level of ions of lactate in your beer, and I'll just adjust it with phosphoric.
So my approach is way less complicated. I know that you use like a blend of your tap water and RO water, right? Like store bought RO water.
Yeah.
So
because that allows me to use less acid.
Right. So my tap water, like I said, 80% or so of the time is very consistently, low minerals, and with about an 8.5 pH, 8.5 pH, something like that. And so I just rely on Bruin water and 88% lactic acid every time. And I cannot remember the last time Bruin water wasn't spot on, which is really a luxury for me. And kind of, I've got good enough water that I can do that. And I tend to just kind of aim for 5.2 to 5.3 for almost every beer. Every once in a while, it'll come in a little bit lower. There was a beer that I brewed fairly recently where the pH came in. It was a beer with a lot of roast malt, and the pH came in at like 5.0. And I called up my friend from the water district, and he was like, "Oh yeah." He's like, we had to flip off your pump to your house for a bit because they were doing some work on it, and so that was kind of my sign that. But you know what, the beer came out good. Okay, we got to take a quick break. But before we get into that, I just had this memory of somebody in one of the experiments. When we come back from the break, we are going to talk about the experiments that we've done and some implications and whatnot. But after one of them, a reader commented, and I think it's a good question: what is the purpose of a pH meter if when you mash in, that mash pH is what it is? And do you utilize that reading to adjust your mash pH? Or I don't know if I'm saying this very clearly. Once that pH is in, if you're 10 minutes into the mash and you take the reading, is it worth adjusting later on?
Yeah. Or you're along for the ride.
Yeah, exactly.
You can certainly adjust if you have a pH meter and that's what you like to do. Some people want to do just one simple adjustment and just ride it out. And if you ride it out, you can taste the beer. And if it's okay to you, then don't make an adjustment. That's your new mash pH, right? Oh, I was a little high or I was a little low. Or you can adjust it. You can adjust it using brewing water because you can say, oh, I was 0.1 high, and you can go in and add some calcium hydroxide, pickling lime, and you can adjust it there. And you can do it inside of brewing water. You can try to make it like a phantom, 0.1 or 0.2 higher, and then add that calcium or that pickling lime to your mash.
So is it worth adjusting the mash pH once you're already 10 or 15 minutes into the mash?
It is if you want to, right? If you want to, then yes. It's a hobby, or if it.
Well, no, that's what I'm saying.
If you want to,
is there an effect? Okay, if I'm 10 or 15 minutes,
there's an effect. Yeah.
If I'm 10 or 15 minutes into the mash, ostensibly a lot of conversion has already taken place. And one of the arguments behind mash pH, getting it in the proper range, is that it's going to impact the quality of conversion and your efficiency and whatnot. So if I'm 10 or 15 minutes into the mash, is it worth adjusting my pH if I take a measurement and I realize that I'm too high or too low?
If you've already if you're adjusting mash for the sake of conversion, yeah, that ship has sailed. But if you want to set the mash pH now to set it for the rest of the beer process, you can adjust now in the mash, or you can adjust in the boil. It depends on why you're setting the mash pH. If you're looking for a compromise, 5.2 to 5.5, because it's decent for most enzymes, and then that will give you, like a 5.2 knockout, and then when you go into your boil kettle, you're going to drop another 0.1 to 0.2 in the boil kettle. So you go, okay, I'm fine. I'm in a fine spot. If you were at like real extreme, you might want to adjust it in the mash, but you can also adjust it in the kettle. It depends on what you want to do. All
right. Well, all of that presumes that mash pH actually has a qualitative impact on the character of the beer that we make. And when we return from this break, that's what we're going to talk about. The experiments that we've done testing out the impact of mash pH. Stick with us. If, like me, you prefer the simpler side of brewing beer, you have got to check out the Brew Bag, a food-safe fabric filter that allows for mashing of the finest crushed grain without risking the dreaded stuck sparge. I've been recommending these things since I started using them. They are awesome. The Brew Bag offers the only completely reinforced fabric filter for brewing that can be used over 100 times and comes in sizes that fit most mash tuns, or you can even have one custom made. Go check the Brew Bag out at brewinabag.com and be sure to use promo code TBP17 to get 10% off your order of $30 or more. So about 3 years ago, I was having a conversation with a buddy of mine named Dan Paris. He blogs occasionally over at inboundsbrewing.com. And I had made the comment that, water chemistry doesn't matter. I had heard from people I trust in the brewing world that it should be the last thing you focus on. And that had sort of convinced me that, if I were to make these small tweaks, I probably wouldn't be able to tell a difference. I had messed around with gypsum and calcium chloride in the past, and I used such a small amount that I was pretty convinced that water chemistry didn't matter that much. So I designed the very first water chemistry experiment we had done. And basically what I did is I did one batch with I believe it was just my tap water, and another batch where I adjusted the mineral profile for whatever style of beer I was making. And after brewing it and serving it to tasters and all of that, sure enough, the results came back significant. And not only that, I was very easily able to tell a difference between these beers, which ingrained in me this idea that water chemistry certainly does have an impact. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that I think doing it makes better beer. Adjusting your water chemistry and your water profile makes better beer, but it has an impact. And that interested me enough to where I now focus on water chemistry for every batch I make. Well, in that first experiment, there were two components, as there are for most people who adjust their water. There's mineral profile, and then there's that pH. Now, there's a relationship between the two. Minerals are going to impact your pH to some degree, but for most of us, to get into that range that is said to be proper and is said to be best for beer, we have to make adjustments to the pH. And we recently became interested in what the impact of pH has on the beer, and we designed a couple of experiments.
So Jake did a low mash pH experiment, and as we said before, commonly accepted ideal range is somewhere between 5.2 and 5.6 mash pH, and you can change that depending on what you want to emphasize and what you want to optimize, right? But Jake decided to test, decidedly quite low. So he was at 4.33, so we'll say 4.3 on his low mash pH, and his other beer, his side-by-side beer, was a more typical 5.3.
And 4.3, I mean, that is really low. That the 4.
Yeah.
For me to get that low, I'd have to use massive amounts of lactic acid. I'm sure if I recall, that's what Jake did as well. What would we expect, traditionally from a conventional perspective from a low mash pH or a mash pH being that low?
So, the text will say you have an issue with loudering. You start to have loudering issues. You'll have lower efficiency. You're outside of the optima for beta and alpha amylase. You're at peak optimization for protease. So you'll have, you should see a lot of protein breakdown. So you should expect to have less foam stability. You'll have less optimization for utilization of hop isomerized acids and essential oil extraction. So you should have, less hop aroma. You should have less bitterness. You should have less color pickup on the low mash pH beer because, you extract more color at higher pHs. And for the higher pH beer, 5.3, you should expect it to be more standard in line with what a normal recipe would be.
Right. There's a part of me even that, you kind of mentioned it before, but as you move on past the mash, pH does seem to kind of follow along the track with where it was at before. So if it's a 4.3 in the mash for Jake's experiment here, I would expect it to be, potentially a little bit lower by the end of the boil and then after fermentation. And I would expect on a sensory level to maybe, be able to, maybe that low mash pH beer is going to have more of that acidic character, not be sour, but have something noticeably different in it compared to the beer that was mashed at more of a standard or acceptable pH of 5.3.
Well, there's a little but though in there, and that's fermentation is a great equalizer. So yeast act as a little bit like an ion pump, and they want to regulate their environment, right? So great fermentation does cover a lot of sins, and a lot of times what you'll see is these beers, they converge at a normal pH. It's kind of counterintuitive. There's some exceptions, but because of buffering, in the resultant beer, so beer has buffers, and because of fermentation by yeast, even though these beers started at almost a 1 pH difference, 4.3 to 5.3, they don't end at a pH unit difference.
And I guess the question then becomes, can people taste a difference? Because if we're gonna invest all of this energy into monitoring and adjusting our mash pH, the idea being that one, it's going to have either some sort of noticeable impact on the conversion rate, on efficiency, and or on the finished character of the beer. And, in Jake's experiment, he served these beers to tasters, and we were unable to establish significance for this one. So tasters could not reliably distinguish these two beers from each other, and which is fascinating to me.
Right. So, that begs the question, like, what are we doing this for? So, we like to say a lot, it's one test, and we did do low versus normal. We didn't do low versus high, but, and you did normal versus high, right?
That's right. I was very interested in Jake's results. And so what I did is I designed an experiment to kind of peel off from what Jake had done. So rather than testing the extremes on either end, what I did is I designed one beer to have a standard pH, which was 5.2, around 5.2. And I compared that to a beer that I intentionally mashed at 6.4 pH, which again is way outside of the range of what most brewers would accept as being, preferable for a mash. And there are some things that come with a high mash pH. I think when it comes to pH of the mash, the high mash pH is avoided far more, and there's a lot more negative that people believe can come from that than a lower mash pH, which seems to be focused more on conversion rates and whatnot. But a high mash pH is said to, that higher pH is said to extract more tannin, astringency causing tannin from the grain husks in beer.
Higher pH increases the solubility of tannins, and those tannins, just like a tea bag effect, if you put a brewed tea bag on like your palate, your tongue, whatever, it has that vasorestrictive effect. It kind of feels as if your mouth is puckering.
Yeah. I get like a pinching in my jowls, kind of in the back of my jaw.
Right, and so that is due to tannins, and tannins are said to be, or they are more soluble in higher pH. So you risk, if you per the text, you risk extracting more tannins into your beer with a high mash pH, and subsequently with a high lauter. If you're doing your sparging and your pH creeps up, you can pull more tannins into your beer.
Right.
But I would like to say that anecdotally, it seems like a long and efficient lager can remove some of those sins.
Yeah. Tannins are one of those things that I've been, they seem to be able to precipitate out and leave, even in the worst, most astringent beer, if you let it sit long enough, and that's appropriate for the style, maybe they can fall out. But
so long as they don't, so long as they don't combine with proteins and become a permanent haze, that's the risk, right? So you have some tannins, you have some proteins, you get a permanent chill haze, but that's a different topic.
Right. So in the experiment I did, I made an IPA, which, there were people out there who were saying, why the hell would you make an IPA for this? And I have a reasoning for it, and we consult on all of these things. I'm not saying this to defend my choice of making an IPA, but hops are another source of tannins. And my thinking was high grain bill, because I wanted to get in that 6.0 ABV range. So the more grist, the more that was there for tannins to be taken out of, plus the more hops I added. Again, if pH has an impact, and they're not in the mash, but that higher pH wort that's coming out of the mash could potentially extract more tannins from the hops as well. So I made an IPA for this. Maybe it wasn't the best choice in some people's opinions, and we will be revisiting it, I promise. But surprisingly, I go and I serve this beer to a bunch of tasters, and I say we because I am among the folks who could not reliably distinguish the high pH beer from the beer that was mashed at 5.2.
Well, same results with Jake, right? So Jake, he had a non-significant result as well, and it just goes to show that maybe these things don't have as big of an impact as we think. So there's a measurable difference, right? I mean, if you go look at Jake's article, there's different measurables, there's different gravities, there's different pHs. So the beers are different as far as being measured, but organoleptically or perceptibly, they're not as different as we fear. So
right.
A lot of times it just comes down to like, ride it out, man. That one person who asked that question about, oh my God, my mash pH isn't what I wanted it to be, should I adjust it? Well, you can if you like to, and that's enjoyable to you, or you can just ride it out, and it'll probably be fine.
The thing that's amazing to me, and again, Jake and I compared different things. His was low mash pH versus normal. Mine was normal versus high. And in Jake's, he had some minor differences in the objectively measurable variables, but both beers in mine, the low pH or the standard pH and the high pH, were squarely at 1060 OG or 1059, 1060 OG, and then both finished within a point of each other. 1013 for the standard pH, 1012 for the high pH. One of the things that I noticed in the high mash pH, and this is something that I don't see very often, is that wort, when it was boiling, had that just huge hot break that dropped out really quickly. And I thought that was interesting because I don't typically see that in the beers during my boil. And I know some people who use tap water do. Maybe makes me wonder to what extent that is a function of pH.
Wait, you had more. You had more protein chunks in the high mash pH?
Absolutely. And
that's bizarre. That's counterintuitive because
that's what I thought too, man.
Yeah. Yeah. So you might have hit a different isoelectric point, I mean, without looking at the charts, whatever.
Yeah.
But that's awesome because you observed that happened, right?
Oh yeah.
But typically what happens is say you're like around 5.5, Chris Colby had an article on Beer and Wine Journal about how you could add, one of the calcium salts, calcium sulfate, calcium chloride, you can add it to the boil. And then once you hit the certain pH, the isoelectric point of the proteins that typically make up wort, you can actually see them come together and start to coagulate. And you can do it with acid too. You can boil, you just add a drop of acid weight, and you can watch all of a sudden you'll start getting that snowflake, egg drop soup look. And then that's magically somewhere around 5.2,
Yeah.
So you might have hit another point above it. So you were so high where you met another point where these proteins, or a certain group of proteins, were attracted to each other again. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah. I was fascinated by it, and I had the opposite expectation as well, that lower mash pH, which I believe Jake did observe in his experiment, that also had a better hot break. But then you look at these other things that. Probably the most interesting observation for me is, you got this mash that is separated by 1.3 or so pH, and then I go and I boil the wort and I test the pH after the boil. And all of a sudden that boil, just the boil alone, brings that difference down to about 0.5. Around half of a 0.5 pH. And then I ferment the beers and let them condition and do all of that. And after they're carbonated, I take out samples, I decarbonate them, I let them warm up to room temperature. And lo and behold, the pH of the beers at this point, after boiling and fermentation, where they started at vastly different, is 4.5 on the standard pH beer and 4.6 on the high pH beer. In fact, it was 4.55 and 4.64. So the difference was only 0.09, which is just mind-boggling to me how incredibly strong yeast is at bringing these things together, at fixing those problems, if you will.
Yeah. Well, I'd say, I think it's been said before, but, brewing is a fairly robust process, and it happened, one theory is that it happened on accident a few times in a few different places, through ancient history. And it wouldn't have happened on accident if it needed us to meddle with it a whole bunch, Yeah,
no, it's true. So I think a lot of people, when they read these results, there are a certain number of people who look and say, well, great, I don't have to worry about mash pH anymore. Is that your takeaway?
Well, no, I think it's a culmination of a lot of, and I know I don't like the term, but best practices or better practices that seem to be a good idea. They come together to make a good and reliable beer. And you can probably drive up to the lines, on a couple of them here and there and get away with it, because brewing, the process from brewing liquor to mashing all the way through to fermentation and serving seems to have a lot of correctives processes through just natural reactions. So it kind of compensates for itself and makes a good beverage.
Yeah. I think more than anything, this is one of those things that, on the professional level, there are things that you really have to pay attention to if you want to keep your business rolling. And if having your pH in that range creates any form of insurance from, poor efficiency or even consistency of process or whatever it might be, then you're going to do that. And it is like legitimately important to do that. I do wonder if on the homebrew scale, maybe we concern ourselves a little bit too much with mash pH. It doesn't mean I'm going to be changing my ways. I'm still going to monitor my pH. I'm still going to aim for 5.2 to 5.3 in every batch that I make. I will say though that these two results together have caused me to kind of question just how necessary that is. Though again, like I think professionals choose to do. I prefer consistency, and I'm going to do it just for insurance.
Well, so for you, right? Say there's a little bit of a change in the grain bill. The grain, the makeup. And all of a sudden you end up with a little bit of a hazy beer. Is that the end of the world for you? No.
Of course
right?
not.
I mean,
yeah.
Right. So, but for a professional brewer who's making a beer that's typically clear and the customer expects that, by having these proper pHs across, it's like a safety. You're inside the boundaries. So a little teeny swerve to the left or to the right is forgiven because your process is sound. You're always here. So now a little bit of a change in the grain, a little bit of change in the hops, you're already in the middle. So, in the end, the beer comes out clear. It comes out stable, microbiologically. It's in that range of the taste you want it for finished pH. I mean, these guys and girls design their beers to be a certain way,
Absolutely.
And all these changes on the peripheral are minor as long as you're in the middle of where you want to be. So you design your beer to be, 4.3 final pH. Well, some things change. It's no big deal. But for a home brewer, do you care?
Yeah,
you probably not.
I couldn't agree more. And this idea of mash pH isn't something we're disinterested in now. And in fact, we have plans to actually test the extremes on both sides. So we're going to do a low mash pH versus a high mash pH, and I promise we'll do it in a much more simple, non-hoppy IPA beer. But that's what we got for mash pH. Thank you so much for joining us. If you like what we're doing and you want more of it, head over to brulosophy.com/support to view a list of ways you can help us out. And don't forget to check out the rewards you can get for supporting us at patreon.com/brulosophy. If you have questions you want answered on a future Brew & A episode, you can email them to marshall@brulosophy.com, or if you follow us on Facebook, Instagram, or Twitter, you can ask there too. Thanks again for listening. We'll be back soon with the next episode of the Brulosophy podcast. Until then, think beer.
Start off the morning with some hot tea, lemon and honey cause it soothes my throat. Put some herb in the bowl, yeah, it's homegrown. Ain't gotta go through the middleman no more. Life is good, the likelihood of me.
Looking for a new career? Welcome to Do HVAC Training Service Center in North Charleston. Enroll today in our comprehensive HVAC training hands-on field experience-based program, covering troubleshooting, maintenance, installation, and more on various HVAC systems and ductwork. We offer EPA and NAEP preparation and testing, along with various certifications. Enjoy payment options. Achieve certification in under 5 months. Enroll now for your new journey of skill development and career advancement. Log on to dewhvactrainingsc.com to inquire.